Servus Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. Today it is finally time to talk about the states Sachsen, Thüringen and Brandenburg. Saxony, Thuringia and Brandenburg. It is summertime and also the political world takes a summer break in Germany now, but very soon already we will have elections in those three states. Brandenburg and Sachsen will elect their Landtag, the regional parliament, in the beginning of September. Thüringen will follow then by the end of October. In these three states, the AfD is very strong according to the polls now, and we can expect a very good result for the patriotic opposition in Germany there. In this video today, I want to first present to you the developments since the last election and the recent polls. I also want you to understand what the current status quo is in these states. Before I will focus on Sachsen, the Free State of Sachsen, in order to show you what kinds of low and drastic measures the current establishment has to use in order to try to stay in power. Before I show you the data, I want to make some general remarks though. Since the 1990s, the part that was formerly known as the GDR, the so-called German Democratic Republic, is known as East Germany. I do not like this term. This term is wrong. Let's just say that Ostdeutschland, East Germany, is not part of the Federal Republic of Germany today. The states Sachsen-Anhalt, Sachsen and Thüringen are actually Central Germany, Mitteldeutschland. When you look on the map, at least for Thüringen, it is very clear that this is in the center of Germany. And these states are part of the region that we call Mitteldeutschland. My second remark is about the established parties there. What I refer to as established parties is of course Angela Merkel's CDU party, the formerly Christian Conservative, now Conservative party, then also the Social Democratic SPD. For the Western German states, I would say that the Green Party and the Liberal Party are definitely part of the political establishment. The states on the territory of the former GDR, however, have another party that is definitely part of the establishment there, and that is the party called Die Linke, the Left Party. They are definitely a socialist party. I would even go as far as to call them communist. After a couple of reformations and name changes, they are still, however, the successor of the former Soviet Unity Party of the GDR. And just like in many other neighboring countries to our east, the old elites of the Soviet era are still trying to get back into power. Now they can change their name as often as they want. They are fooling nobody. In Germany, this old elite is represented by the party Die Linke. So in the context of the federal states that joined us after the reunification, this party belongs to the establishment definitely. So how was the situation before 2015? The dominating parties in those three states were the SPD, the CDU and Die Linke. I would say that especially in Sachsen, the CDU was dominating. In Brandenburg, the SPD was a little stronger. And in Thüringen, the socialist Die Linke party was stronger compared to the other two states. Now, you all know what happened in 2015. A very drastic and illegal step was taken by the federal government. And you can see in the polls that the established parties, which for those three states are the three parties that I have just mentioned, are actually sinking in popularity. You can see that the AfD and the Green Party were rising in the polls, but especially the AfD became a dominant force in all three states. In all of these states, the AfD is, according to the polls now, over 20% in voter popularity. In Brandenburg, they are in fact the strongest party. In Thüringen, they are right behind the Socialist Party. And in Sachsen, they are fighting with the CDU for position number 1. Now in Sachsen, the CDU is currently in a coalition with the SPD, so that is the same kind of coalition that we have on the federal level, the so-called Grand Coalition. That is not that grand anymore. In Brandenburg, there is a red-red coalition. That means the Social Democrats together with the Socialists. And in Thüringen, more drastic means were already necessary to keep the AfD out of the government. That means that the SPD and the Socialist Party had to form a coalition with the Green Party in order to have a stable coalition. This is a phenomenon that we see in many European countries. It is used in order to keep patriotic parties out of government. They are the untouchables of the political system. We saw that, for example, during the French elections when Marine Le Pen and her Rassemblement National were actually the strongest party, but then all the other social groups and parties banded together. Even though they normally hate each other and have nothing in common, they all banded together in order to prevent Marine Le Pen to succeed. And this is exactly what we see in Germany. All the other parties have an agreement that they will not form a coalition with the AfD. As you have seen now, even the former Soviet party is in a coalition with other democratic, so-called democratic parties right now. That used to be a taboo still 10 years ago, but now they have accepted them. The AfD is of course still a pariah in the political system in Germany. When you look at the polls right now and you ask yourself what kind of coalition could be formed theoretically, mathematically even, if the outcome of the election would be like the polls suggest right now, you see that none of the current governments, none of the current coalitions right now have a majority in parliament. And the only option, the only way to keep the AfD out of government is that all the other parties basically form a large coalition. Bear in mind that these parties have no common ground, and the lowest common denominator would be at least the AfD is not in government. Congratulations. Several people have already suggested that the AfD should form a coalition with the CDU. However, there is an agreement in the CDU on the federal level that such a cooperation is absolutely out of the question. The current governor of Saxony, Mr. Kretschmer, also says that he will not form a coalition with the AfD. Which of course puts him under a lot of pressure when you consider that a lot of the rank and file of the CDU in Saxony has of course a lot of sympathy for the AfD. So you can imagine he gets pressure from below to open himself up to the AfD, while from the other direction, from the top of the party command and from the general establishment in Germany, he will be pressured towards such a multi-party anti-AfD coalition. This is why he started to engage in very extreme rhetoric at the moment, where he claims that the AfD has become radicalized. This just shows his utter helplessness, because the people in Sachsen know all too well what the old slogans were 20-30 years ago. And I think the following thing that the CDU did in Sachsen also reminds some of the older folks in Leipzig, Dresden and Bautzen of the old days under Soviet rule. What they did is absolutely outrageous, and there is absolutely no apology for such a thing. I want to take a couple of minutes in order to explain to you precisely what they did. Now, in short, they tried to bar more than half of the candidates of the AfD from the election. And I want to explain to you how they did that now. First, you need to understand that in German parliamentary elections, there are basically two types of seats in parliament, and that is direct mandates and list positions. The direct candidates are people who won in their district. That means they got the most votes in their district. Now just imagine if we would only have direct candidates, then because we don't have a two-party system like in the US, for example, we have many parties. That means that if we had a winner takes it all system, that a party that gets 20% of the votes could have all the seats in parliament actually. That would mean that 80% of the votes would be disregarded completely, and that would not be a representative parliament. This is why the second half of the seats in parliament are filled with list positions. For that, every party has to compile a list of candidates, and then those seats in parliament will be filled according to what percentage this party got in the election overall, like the popular vote. If you are on list position 1, you have a very good chance of getting into parliament, even though you don't win in your district or you're not even running in a district. Now, the lower your list position is, the more unlikely it will become that you are actually making it into parliament after the election. And who makes it on the list and on what position on the list you are is actually decided on a convention of the party prior to the election. And the AfD wanted to be really democratic in Saxony, so they wanted to give the candidates a lot of time to actually present their case and introduce themselves to the party officials, to the delegates. This took a lot of time, so they couldn't get through all the candidates on the first day. This is why they had to come together a second time to finish and get through with all the candidates. You must remember that in other parties, the list is already decided by the party elite, and then the convention only votes on this list. In the case of the AfD, every candidate could present himself, could basically give a short introduction speech, and then the delegates would vote on the list position. Of course, this takes much more time than just raising your hand and agreeing to what the 2 or 3 elite members have decided, like it is customary in the established parties. And this was used by the CDU party now in order to attack the AfD. Because you have to know that it is a CDU party member who is in charge of overseeing the formalities for the election process and the preparation of the election. The CDU now claimed that the AfD would have had to actually apply officially for the right to have a second go, to come together a second time to finish the list. And that if you cannot finish that list in one sitting, then this is somehow not correct. This is of course an absolutely ridiculous technicality, but it allowed them to bar actually more than half of the delegates from the election. Instead of 61 candidates, they only allowed them 18. And if you look at the polls, they would actually have many more seats in parliaments than just 18. What that would have meant actually for the election is that even though a lot of people voted for the AfD and they would have had like 30 seats in parliament, they would have only been allowed to fill 18 of them, and all the other seats would have gone to other parties. And how anybody can say that such an election would be democratic is really beyond my comprehension. Fortunately, the federal court of the state of Sachsen decided that this is probably not legal, and they intervened right ahead before the election. They said that the first 30 positions and not the first 18 positions are acceptable for the election, which could actually be enough not to make a difference then. But the final verdict is really coming out in August still, but still before the election. But they said already that what the CDU did here was probably highly illegal. And I have to stress once again that this is actually happening in a state that was living through Soviet rule, where things like that were common practice. So that means that many people, many voters in these states, they still remember that stuff. They are sensitized to these practices of oppressive regimes. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to see how that must look like for the voters of Sachsen. So I actually think that unless something major happens now, the outcome of those 3 elections will be pretty close to the polls that we saw right now. As I said, it is summer vacation time in Germany. We call that the Sommerloch, the summer hole, and that means that everyone is pretty much on vacation. The parliament is not meeting anymore. And there is not so much happening in the world of politics. The media also doesn't really know what to report anymore. So a lot of weird and not really important stories are actually presented to the people. Not a lot that could swing this still around. So we will see probably a dominating position of the AfD, more than 20% in all of these 3 states. Desperate attempts of the establishment to smear the AfD and to use all kinds of underhanded, dirty tricks in order to make people's votes invalid. And if this all doesn't work out for them, you can really see after the election how they will desperately try to form this great front where everybody from churches to labor union and sports clubs will band together against the AfD. Of course, I will keep you updated on this affair because this is for the rest of the year, I think, the most important thing in German politics. And wherever I will be, I will find time to report on that for you guys. So I hope I could show you in this video that it is really justified that the AfD says, Im Osten geht die Sonne auf. The sun is rising in the east. People in Central and Eastern Germany are not suffering from multi-generational brainwashing and a guilt complex like we in the West do, at least not to such a fatal extent. I really want to thank my subscribers and patrons who helped to make this video possible. If you liked this presentation and you want to see more of that, please like, share and subscribe and consider making a donation or becoming a patron of mine. I am grateful for any amount and it helps to keep this channel going. Be safe wherever you are. Servus, Kameraden.